Today's episode is something I've been looking forward to for a long time. A walk all the way across Dartmoor, from north to south. Now, there are plenty of ways you can do this, of course. If you pack light and are determined, it can be done in a day. Perhaps you could do it in stages, staying at some local inns. If you're completely insane, you could even attempt walking it in a perfectly straight line. But I'll be doing it the Dartmoor podcast way. That is, on my own at a steady pace, drinking lots of tea, camping out, and largely improvising a route while going on wild tangents and seeking out some little adventures along the way. I was not to be disappointed, and I hope you won't be either. Grab yourself a drink, get your headphones on, and prepare for a lot of beautiful views, a good helping of whimsical nonsense, and a little pinch of danger. Welcome back to the Dartmoor podcast. The journey started on a train. Oakhampton sits at the northernmost point of the moor, and the new train line has made it a great place to start. Going north to south seemed like the right way to do things for some reason. Maybe it just sounds better, or feels more like going downhill. Anyway, I had 3 days put aside, and the weather had promised me not a drop of rain. Perfect. The first train of the day got me to Oakhampton station for 8:15. And I immediately turned the wrong way. Great start. The first leg of my journey was to follow the East Oakmont River through a beautiful gorge of temperate rainforest until it guided me up onto the moor proper. This journey wasn't just going to be walking though. I made a list of some of the other little Dartmoor podcast-y achievements I'd like to make along the way. Find a letterbox, see how many bird species I could count, go for a wild swim, forage some food, tick off some new Dartmoor 365s, and film a load of pretentious lens flare shots. I also had a parallel list of things to avoid. Getting tick bites, getting wet feet, difficult as my boots had holes in, getting lost, or getting killed. Little did I know, in my blissful ignorance at this point, that I'd already failed one of these, and was walking in completely the wrong direction after unwittingly leaving the East Oakmont and following the Moor Brook instead. Luckily, I soon sniffed out that something was wrong and managed to take a creative shortcut through some fields to get me back on track. Not a disaster, but it certainly didn't bode well for the next 3 days. Anyway, determined to make up time, I crossed the East Oakmont into a ferny valley and headed due south towards the open moor. It was at this point, for the first time, that I felt the scale and solitude of the task. I felt very small amongst the glowing gorse and heather of the steep valley, equally daunted and excited by what lay ahead. And onto the open moor. Now, this isn't actually the first time I've tried to cross the moor in this fashion. Years ago, I made an embarrassing failed attempt due to a lack of fitness, too heavy a pack, and bad planning. For example, I made the decision to not go too far on the first day and camp near Blackatall Beer, which led me way too far west and left me having far too much to do on day 2, as well as placing me in that northwest part of the moor which always seems to unnaturally drain your energy. Probably something to do with witches. This time, though, I was determined not to make such an error, and so headed straight down to Oak Tor, where I'd sat with Darren in the Ted Hughes episode a few weeks back. It was here that I had to make my first big navigational decision.
So, here's going to be the first time I'm going to break with format here.
Oh, not this again. Come on, we've established that I do the narrating. Past George just ends up rambling and repeating himself. The whole point of me scripting it is that I can put it succinctly and poetically.
Has he finished griping? Okay, as I was saying, now's a good time, I think, to break with format for sort of the first time and vlog a little bit, just because it'll be funny to see my sort of overconfidence now, and with hindsight, see how it really went. I've already got completely lost once, gone the wrong way, so that's a good start. And my terrible rucksack is kind of digging into my shoulders a bit already. But that's only going to get lighter. It's mostly food in there. I'm going to eat a sandwich in a bit, probably the heaviest thing in there, so I'll be a bit lighter. Except when you think about it, I won't actually be lighter, will I? Not until I drop it off, so to speak.
Oh, charming. It's because of this sort of horrible stuff that we don't let him talk.
Anyway, it's my first big navigational decision. If I'm sensible, from here at Oak Tour, where I spoke with Darren a few weeks ago about Ted Hughes, we just sort of kept going south, and it would be sensible to follow that path and end up on sort of Hanging Stone Hill. But what I thought might be more fun is there's like a Connect 4 of tours sort of heading towards Fernworthy, and they're all Dartmoor 365s that I've not been to, and they're all tours I've not been to. And I think that might be quite an exciting way to go, seeing I'm not really in any hurry, but it's going to be a lot of ups and downs. For my poor knees, I played football yesterday, and as normal after football, just my knees swell up. There you can see that one's, even for the jeans, that one's just a bit
Before I
bigger
left
than
Oak Tour, I wanted to look for a letterbox that was hidden there among the clitter. And despite a lot of searching and checking my bearings, I completely failed to locate it. I'm coming to accept that I'm just terrible at letterboxing, and I don't know what it is. Am I looking in the wrong sorts of places? Is my compass work bad? Am I misunderstanding something? Or am I just unlucky? I also failed to find 3 other letterboxes on this trip, but have spared you the frustrating footage. Anyway, as Past George said, time for a little 4 tours challenge.
You can do this, you're a soldier.
The third tour on the list was Watton Tour, which had this wonderful rock formation called the Thurlstone. As Past George says, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's cool. Makes me want to do like a leap of faith kind of thing.
No.
What do you mean, no? The fact that you're narrating it means that I survive.
Can't fault the logic there, I suppose. Okay, don't get cocky. Oh dear, we've lost past George. Now, I know he'd never say it himself, but in his memory, I think he'd have wanted you to like and subscribe. Oh, never mind, the paradox is bringing him back. The final tour in the 4 Tours challenge wasn't really a tour, but Manga Rock, a boulder that marks the boundary between the parishes of Gidley and Lidford. Somehow I ended up wading through a gorse patch on the way there and had this slightly hairy moment with a venomous serpent. Still, nadders avoided, I made it to this strangely named rock. I couldn't find any etymological information as to why it's called Manga Rock at all, but assume it's not because you read it backwards or whatever. By this time, the afternoon was drawing on, and I needed a nice place to rest and stuff down some calories. Just a bit further along the ridge was another Dartmoor 365, the ruins of Teenhead Farm, which promised to be a tranquil place to sit down for a snack. Something about the place was quite spooky though. Tall, dark, non-native trees crowded around the giant crumbling masonry, and the whole place closed around me like a fist, hiding me from the open skies of the moor. I saw a pied flycatcher and a windchat here though, so not all bad. Probably the best birds on the list so far. And then it was decision time. Rather than head straight on southwards, I opted to go for a walk through Fernworthy Forest itself. The change of habitat meant I could add crossbill to the list. I'm exceptionally cool, so write it like this. And I was really impressed by this stone row and circle in a lovely clearing among the conifers. Oh, and can we just take a moment to appreciate what a lovely name Fernworthy Forest is? Like something out of Tolkien. Frodo, fetch Father Figginbottom. The Fernworthy Forest ferry's floated off. But the day was growing late, something which didn't seem to faze past George as much as it should have.
So it's coming up to 7 o'clock and I'm in Stone Circle in Fernworthy, which is really
Face
nice.
the camera, please.
It's beginning to get a bit sort of chilly and still and eveningy. I still feel like I've got plenty in the tank. I could go further. I obviously can't camp in the forest, but it's only a short walk to Assicombe Hill, which was purple on the map. So we're going to go and see if there's anywhere good to camp there. Hopefully not too windy or exposed because I've not got my tent. But yeah, I think it's all right to save a bit of energy for tomorrow. I think I've come as far as I wanted to. And other than forgetting to fill up my water bottle, I needed to go and get some water now. Things are sort of going to plan. It's all right.
Doesn't seem to do much. Suppose I'd better leave it in 3D as I found it. Now we're talking. After my brief stop to recharge my batteries, no, literally, I managed to find a stream to fill up my water bottle and decided I'd like a little look at the reservoir itself. Easier said than done. For such a large body of water, it was quite well hidden away from this angle, and when I got there, the evening midges had other ideas. There was one little incident though. My urgent body language here was caused by a lot of birds flying up as if in panic from the far end of the reservoir, and I had a very distant glimpse of a large pale bird with dark wings, seemingly hovering for a moment before it dipped out of sight. Frustratingly, I didn't get a good enough look, but it may have been an osprey, a fish eagle, making its steady way back to Africa. But I suppose it might instead have just been a great black-backed gull. One of those weird ones where I was 95% sure of osprey at the time, but have since talked myself out of it. But there were more pressing matters at hand than bird ID or staring at a spooky shed. Where was I going to sleep? I made it to Assacombe Hill with less than an hour until dark, and was disappointed to find that, like a lot of the purple bits on the camping map, it wasn't really appropriate for camping at all. It's all well and good saying you can camp here when there's barely a flat or dry bit of ground to be found. The night was setting in, and the bare slope of Assacombe Hill was exposed to the cold breeze from the south. To make matters worse, it was beginning to drizzle, just as the weather forecast had promised it wouldn't. And to keep the weight down on my trek, I didn't have a tent, just an inflatable mat, a thin summer sleeping bag, a cheap bivvy bag, and my lavoo. What would you do here? On one side of the wall, the danger of a very wet, cold and uncomfortable night indeed on the bare hillside among the cattle and ponies. Or on the other side, the danger of getting in trouble, or having to wrestle a Sasquatch among the dark and spooky pines. Whichever one you'd like, that's the one that happened. Everyone's happy. Having #LeftNoTrace, I made an early start, eager to get walking and get warm. The morning was pretty bleak, and I trudged past some fairly sorry-looking livestock who'd endured the same damp night as me. But there was already the promise that it would brighten up as the day wore on, and I resolved to have breakfast on Stannon Tor under the quickly brightening sky.
Good morning from Sitterford Tor.
Stannon Tor, not Sitterford. See, you shouldn't be doing this.
Yesterday was a really good day. I got a good distance done. Bit of a rush at the end to find a place to sleep, but part of the adventure. It rained in the night, it drizzled all night, which is not what the weather forecast said, but you know, Dartmoor. And it's nothing the lavoo couldn't handle, sort of alright. I think if it had actually rained it would have been pretty uncomfortable, but just sort of drizzle was fine. Got up, had a cup of tea, some granola, so I'm feeling really fresh actually. I can walk miles and miles today. As it happens, I'm going to try and maybe have a slightly more chilled day, especially if it's going to be nice and sunny, the sun's finally coming out. Maybe just find some place to sit in the sun, maybe even have a swim in a river somewhere, eat loads of food. So I'm looking to just like have a really enjoyable day, rush it. I've got kind of Dartmeet in mind as a place, a sort of waypoint to get to maybe around lunchtime, just after lunch. So I've made a navigational decision. I was going to go east a bit more and up through Grimspound, Hamel Down that way, but I changed my mind at the last minute. It looks a bit more direct and a bit simpler to go through Belliver, so that's what I'm going to do.
Yep, get on with it. Decision made, I followed the East Dart through a beautiful gorsy valley and some picturesque low-lying farmland, crossing at the iconic Clapper Bridge down at Postbridge. Belliver Forest was glorious in the morning sun, and families of woodland birds, most notably the starkly coloured redstarts, flitted among the pines, making me wish I'd brought my larger camera to capture them for you. But alas, it would have been too heavy for this mission. Rarest of all on Dartmoor, though, was this, some clear and accurate signage. The tour itself was absolutely stunning. I'd failed my mission to keep my feet from getting wet, but here was a place to dry out in the sun, admire the view, and watch the swallows and house martins as they barrelled joyously within feet of my head. And here was a sign that I was making good progress. It was time to flip the map. But when I went to make my tea montage, I realised I'd made a little boo-boo. I'd forgot to fill up my water bottle at the river, and hardly had any water left. If I were to stick with the original plan and head east to chill out in the woods along the Dart, it was going to be a good couple of hours' walk over steep hills in the hot sun before I could refill. And thinking about it, it was quite a way off course too, leaving me a lot of walking for the last day. I consulted the map and instead decided to head to the nearest water source, the West Dart, down near something or somewhere called Brownberry. Then I could continue south towards the River Swinkham and look for somewhere to spend the afternoon. It looked like there might be some interesting stuff to explore there too. A few navigational snags almost saw me stomping along the B3357, but I eventually found the track down to the riverside. And although the path was like something out of Ultimate Ninja Warrior in places, there were a few nice shady spots to rest. Nowhere perfect though, and although the stepping stones across the river almost fitted the bill, it was a bit too busy for my liking. Out of necessity, I had some lunch under an old ash tree, then continued on my way. The early afternoon got hotter and hotter, and the naughty ponies had monopolised the best shady spots along the river. I was now in truly unfamiliar territory, and had departed from any sort of plan I might have made before I started my trek. Beset by indecision, I wasn't sure whether to head up onto the moor and try and find a way to keep heading south, or whether to try and find a place to camp along the Swinkham and save some energy for the last day. I had no idea if I was in a purple bit of the map, but was equally concerned after last night's rain that I might get caught out in the open if I headed up onto the barren plateau at the southern moor. As luck would have it, I did eventually find a lovely shady ruin along the river where I could at least gather my thoughts and make a plan. Coincidentally, it also turned out to be a Dartmoor 365, John Bishop's house. Presumably not the Scouse comedian, but a renowned builder who lived there in Victorian times. At this stage, I was certainly erring towards staying put. Finally found a little shady spot to have a rest. It is too hot to be out walking in the sun. I'm just going to stay here and explore around here a little bit, have a paddle in the stream. And then
if it gets a bit cooler later on, I'll probably strike on, or at least explore up and down and look for a place to camp where I've got a good place to strike out tomorrow morning. So yeah, I'm just going to explore around here and relax a little bit this afternoon.
Yes, I basically already said all that. But then, at 4 in the afternoon, with about 5 hours until sunset, it suddenly felt a little cooler. I finally managed to get some phone signal to confirm that there was no chance of rain, and where I was just didn't feel right for camping. There were too many animals about, and I just didn't feel welcome, if that makes any sense. So I did something mad instead. I set my sights on the ruins of Red Lake China Clay Works, affectionately known as the Dartmoor volcano, which lay about 6 kilometres to the south as the crow flies. Somewhere I knew well and thought would make a good spot to camp. The problem though, as I knew full well, was that you should never go as the crow flies on Dartmoor. Try to take a shortcut off the path and you always end up in a bog, standing on the bank of an unfordable river, or staring at a mighty and impenetrable wall of gorse and bracken. The map offered few clues other than there would be a big uphill slog and that there were no good navigational features at all, let alone a path between me and my destination. Still, if I could get to the top of Tur Hill, I could in theory just use my compass to head due south until I saw a feature I recognised. A terrible plan, but a plan nonetheless.
Path would be nice. No paths. It's featureless.
After a big climb through a swathe of millennia-covered featureless moor, I saw a stone cross in the distance. Overjoyed to have some sort of landmark to navigate by, I headed for it. Another coincidental 365. I wasn't sure if these crosses were a good omen, a sign of Christian courage, or an ill one, foreshadowing my own gravestone. But I decided to go against all of my own advice and take the plunge anyway. Paths be damned, I was heading south. The ensuing walk was one of the most strange and featureless rambles I've ever attempted. A flat, marshy plain with no tors, cairns, crosses, rivers or copses to take my bearings from. I concentrated on keeping the sun in front of me, the prison mast of Princetown behind, and kept an eye on my compass to stay on track. With the late afternoon sun beating down with surprising ferocity and the wet squishy ground leaking into my boots, it should have been a pretty gruelling journey. Honestly though, I made great time over this stretch. The lack of obstacles and distractions was weirdly liberating as I made my Bedouin beeline due south. I expect that at any other time of year, or if there had even been a little more recent rain, then this would have been a very miserable and boggy stretch indeed. But as it was, although I got wet feet, it was actually quite pleasantly soft and even underfoot. And after about an hour and a half of this, just when I least expected it, the Dartmoor volcano poked its head out of the wastes. I was exactly where I'd hoped to be, somewhere below Green Hill Cairn, but above the worryingly named Fish Lake Mire. I breathed a sigh of relief. But it wasn't quite over. The Dartmoor volcano has an annoying habit of not getting any larger as you walk towards it. Something to do with pixies, I think. And I wasn't approaching it from the easiest direction either. So, by the time I actually got there, I was rather sunburnt, tired, and had disgustingly damp feet marinating in a boggy sludge inside my boots. But it was beautiful, in a slightly eerie, apocalyptic, abandoned, industrial, derelict sort of way. Ironically, for something playfully dubbed the Dartmoor volcano, Red Lake Skytip, as it's more accurately called, is one of the few things on Dartmoor not made out of igneous rock. It's the remains of a failed China clay mining venture in the early 20th century. It's an interesting story, But then I did a whole video about that, so I'll let you find out about it there should this strange cone of earth, the incongruous lake and its accompanying ruins tickle your interest.
Which room do you want?
My place to bivvy up was, rather appropriately, the remains of a hostel where workers would stay when working in the quarry.
Oh, you lot. Move along. Move along, it's my spot now.
What was left of the walls provided just enough shelter for me to hunker down and feel safe, just as long as the naughty ponies left my stuff alone, that is.
Oh, dry socks feels good.
Despite the tired legs, I couldn't visit this place without admiring the bleak view from atop the sky tip itself.
Stay away from my stuff, alright?
And I even got my swim. In the golden light of the low sun, the stony bottom of the lake soon fell away to who knows what depths. And in the middle, when I stopped to tread water, I felt the dark chill of the depths reach up to touch my soles. Creepy. I emerged a new man, ate the same old noodles, and watched the clouds tell their tale. Looking up from my bunk in the foundations of the old hostel ruins, the night sky was alive with stars, meteors and satellites. But I put my night lapse on the wrong setting, so this is all you're getting. It really doesn't do it justice.
Good morning. I would have liked to have stopped and watched the sunrise come up over the volcano, but was absolutely under attack by midges this morning. So I've just packed up, marched off, and just hoping to find a midgey-less spot where I can sit down and have breakfast. But a beautiful night, no rain, hardly any wind, all the stars are out, really nice, and got a relatively straightforward shuffle home now. It's a route I've done before, so I'm not going to get lost. And it's not that far, about 12 kilometres. So on the last leg, just finding somewhere to stop and have a much needed cup of tea with our midgies. That's all I want now.
Fortunately, not too far away, I found a slightly breezier spot for breakfast, looking back north towards the sky tip and the bleak moors I had crossed the evening before. These remnants were a pair of settling tanks for the sludgy china clay sediment mined from the pit. But I always think they look like a pair of giants' tombs laid out on the moor. Refuelled and stretched, I was ready to stomp out the final leg of my journey, especially seeing that the midgies had tracked me down again. Hey, if only my legs were this long, I'd be home in no time. From the dual sarcophaguses of the settling tanks, you can trace the route the wet clay would have flowed along by following the slope downhill, where there are a whole cluster of strange and interesting ruins to explore. And then onto the old railway line that brought the workers up to the pits from Ivybridge on a little train called Puffing Billy. It would just be a case of following it all the way to the end, and I'd have proudly completed my first perambulation across the entirety of Dartmoor.
So
Stop starting everything so.
Old railway track back to Ivybridge now, and that just takes me all the way back. I can't get lost. I don't imagine too much else really eventful will happen.
Great way to engage the viewers.
So now might be a good time to have a little bit of a recap of the adventure across the moor.
Right, absolutely not. That is
think all 3
entirely
days
my
were-
remit. The journey had been a great success. I'd enjoyed pretty much every moment of it. I hadn't completely worn myself out, had discovered some amazing new places, and spoiled myself with beauty. As for my side missions, 7 new Dartmoor 365s, a decent nature list, and a memorable swim in a lake are not to be scoffed at. Foraging was a bit of a non-starter, but I did eat a blackberry if that counts. The biggest failure was the letterboxing though. If there are any experienced letterboxers out there who'd like to come on the podcast and show me how it's done, please get in touch. I'm ready to learn and really want my 100 Club badge. I also failed on all the things I wanted to avoid. I did get a bit lost, got very wet feet, and picked up a couple of tick bites. But nothing disastrous. It could have been so much worse, and honestly, any negatives were so outweighed by the scenery and sense of freedom and intriguing discoveries that they seem completely irrelevant. In any case, the adventure wasn't over yet. The old railway line took me past a smaller pit, left Lake Mire, where the morning sky shone in the mirror-clear lake, and the old railway line scrolled me through the landscape as I waffled on about my adventure.
The second day, that was a real weird one.
See, he's still going.
We were just through.
The route followed a ridge above Sharp Tor, allowing a view down into the magical Piles Copse and across the valley to Tristis Rock and Burford Down, one of my favourite spots on the South Moor. I don't know who's responsible or whether it's even intentional, but the valley leading up from there along the is a beautiful example of natural regeneration. There's some lovely scrubby habitat there and loads of young trees, and it's absolutely alive with birds and insects in the spring. My destination loomed closer, and with the whole of Dartmoor at my back, I was brimful with a glowing sense of achievement. It was just a short trot down a steep lane and I'd be back to civilization. Well, Ivybridge anyway. After 3 days of perfect peace in the wilderness, coming back to reality was an unpleasant and noisy shock. And not just because Ivybridge is a hole. It's only natural that you need time to recalibrate to the volume and bustle of town after the broad, silent, empty swathes of Dartmoor. Still, you can just wander into a shop and get hot food, so that's pretty nice. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.